Alright, tansin ito temtek Chelsea Vowel mitsigason.
Molly Swain mitsigason.
Mantu sakaiganek nitotsin.
Otuskwanek nitotsin.
And we are
Métis in space.
That is our very technical introduction with all of our technical abilities that we technically have.
Indeed.
Yes.
So yeah, we're really excited to be here today and next week to hopefully introduce you to how to podcast from start to finish. Oh my God, I just put fuzz on my own face.
Not the fuzz. Triple trouble.
So we have been podcasting for, that's going on 8 years this year, eh?
Are you serious?
I think so, yeah.
Wow. At some point it's going to be 10 years. But we've had like probably about 2 years of not really podcasting. The last
sort of in and out.
The last episode we put out was like in December of last year.
Oh my God.
It's been a whole year. But yeah, so I think let's just start with that actually. The concept that you don't need to be, if you decide to do a podcast, you don't need to commit to any sort of time frame. Like, this is for you. If other people enjoy it, great. That's fantastic. Building a community along similar interests is really wonderful and rewarding. But don't beat yourself up. This is, you don't need to produce under capitalism. And we've, throughout the sort of the life of this podcast, which we'll explain more about it in a second, there have been babies born, there have been degrees, like we moved across the country, started, new degrees, all, like life still goes on while you're podcasting. And I think acknowledging that and making space for the various events that happen in your life is a key to keeping your project sustainable.
Yeah, I think as podcasting has started to become more mainstream, too, you really have seen an increase or like a rise in sort of like the professionalization of podcasting as a medium. I came across an article a while back that said even for like mid-range budget podcasts, the average episode cost $150,000 to produce, which is just outrageous to me.
Ours cost the price of a bottle of wine.
Yeah. So we are going to show like absolute shoestring, like $0 budget. There's technology available these days. If you are interested in like not outsourcing any of the labor and doing it all yourself or with friends or whatever, you can do it on a budget of $0. The technology available, the software available, all of that. You do not need, you don't need money. You don't need expertise. All you need is the desire to have a good time, make a podcast, throw it out into the world and see what happens. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're going to hopefully take you through, sort of one method of how to do that.
And very much with the ethic of was it Hannah McGregor that said, like, keeping podcasting weird?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Like going into it, like maybe it's going to become your full-time gig, but probably not, and it really depends on what sort of you want out of it. But just from our perspective, the notion of keeping podcasting weird also involves keeping it affordable and really based on your own
accessible.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, maybe we talk a little bit about how we started, or
let's do it.
Okay.
Yeah. So, 2014, all those long years ago.
Now we have that sort of transition where going back in time. Yes,
and far to the east in Montreal. So Chelsea and I, through basically almost just coincidence, ended up being neighbors in Montreal. We didn't know each other prior to that, really. But Chelsea and her family ended up moving into my apartment building on the ground floor. And, so I'm Métis from Alberta. She's Métis from Alberta. We were like, oh, thank God you're here. So we started hanging out more and more and realized we shared a lot of the same interests, including watching science fiction.
Yeah. So we were sitting around. We did that a couple of hangouts, had a couple of hangouts that way for a while, watching whatever. And we were just like sitting there talking at the screen and being like, oh, boo, whatever those Indigenous portrayal. It was terrible because it's mostly terrible. And I don't know, I guess like one day we were like, wow, this is hilarious. We should record this for posterity. We are so funny.
Yeah. We're like, we could laugh at our jokes over and over again if we recorded it.
And so why don't we, right?
Yeah. And it just so happens, another happy coincidence, Ryan McMahon, who's sort of considered like the grandpappy of Indigenous podcasting, he maybe has the longest running Native podcast around, at least that I've heard of. Mm-hmm. So his podcast, Red Man Laughing, he had just released an episode on how to do a podcast, and we just both happened to listen to it. And we were like, well, if Ryan could do it, we could totally do it.
Yeah. And we're like, oh, whatever. Nobody's going to listen to this. Like maybe
super niche.
Yeah. Like maybe our moms will, like, we're, at that point, there really wasn't sort of a community that we were aware of like Indigenous And sort of this podcast is one way that we became aware of that and sort of like we're able to tap into that community. So that's another incentive, I think, for podcasting. But yeah, we thought nobody was going to listen to us. It's fine. We'll just put it out there. And then we will be able to laugh at our own jokes, in perpetuity. Yeah.
So we didn't really go into it sort of thinking about an audience, for example, which is something that, you're probably going to want to do.
Yeah.
Because firstly, podcasting was not particularly big when we started, and Indigenous podcasting, there were very few. Very few.
Yeah. Other than Ryan's, I don't think that there were any that I knew of.
Yeah, I think Ryan and then his Indian and Cowboy Media Network had a couple on the go, but aside from that, like there was, we didn't really listen to a lot of podcasts either, is the thing, right?
Yeah.
Like we really went into it being like, we're going to put it on the internet so we can access it wherever we go and just laugh and laugh. So yeah, we didn't really sit down and do a lot of the planning stuff. Like we sort of planned out kind of what we wanted the basic premise to be, which was we wanted to hang out and have some glasses of wine together, watch something around, sci-fi, fantasy, horror that, dealt in some way with Indigenous people or Indigenous themes. And then we wanted to critique it, talk about it.
On the fly. And that was the thing too, is because we really wanted it to follow the kind of visiting we've been doing. Like, we just wanted to like react to it in the moment, not sit there and analyze it and, do citations and research and then come back with this beautifully crafted argument. We just wanted to respond on, off the cuff.
Yeah.
And the other thing about it too, that I liked is that, we didn't think very hard about names and stuff. We're like, haha, let's call it Métis in space, because that's so funny, because Native people, we're not supposed to be in space. And like, we just, everything, I'm kind of glad, because we went into it with a very like, lol, nobody's going to pay attention to this. So we didn't like get too caught up on those details.
Yeah. So, you may or may not decide to listen to an episode of the podcast. Our audio aesthetic, like the way that we decided to sort of put it all together, it's very sort of cheesy. We both love the really corny sort of like 50s, 60s, 70s sci-fi. So it's all very beep boop, very like low budget sounding, which was all
on purpose.
Yeah.
But also we had no budget. So.
Yeah. And we just like, a big part of it too is like, we're not experts in any of this. We don't want to portray ourselves as experts. And so, a lot of sort of how we frame things is to really try to kind of remind people that we're low budget.
Yeah.
We're amateurs at this, and that's how we want to keep it.
Also, we didn't really want to become experts and stuff. Like we didn't want to have to learn a whole bunch of new skills to do this, because that's sort of a problem when you pick up a new project, right? If you're the type of person who sort of, you get an interest, you're hyper-focused and you're like, I'm going to learn how to crochet. Like, you might watch some videos and do a little bit of it. And some people like really learn how to do the thing, but I didn't really want to learn how to do the thing. I just wanted to like do the visiting and record it. And the rest I figured would sort itself out, and it did.
And yeah, it absolutely did. So the other thing that sort of happened over the years is our sort of motto, our ethos around this is we're doing it for fun. And if it stops being fun, we're going to stop doing it. And that's been really important for us, because we both, as most of us these days, like we're working all the time. We have all sorts of other commitments. And we didn't want this to turn into work, sort of as Chelsea was saying, right? We wanted to keep it fun. And that's also meant that like, we don't feel necessarily beholden to what we're doing or to anybody that is listening to the podcast or engaging with it. We're always really appreciative that people have listened, but, we don't feel like we're indebted to anybody or that we need to follow certain things. So it allows us to really sort of make our own rules and to change them whenever we want. And so we've really transformed how we do the podcast over the years. So sort of our basic premise has remained the same. We've been able to build all sorts of different things into it, and also, have all sorts of weird opportunities that we probably wouldn't have if we had sort of a really strict definition of what it is that we're doing. Like we now have a landback project, which is incredible. We're working on a graphic novel, which is amazing. We did some work for the federal government on sort of like, extractive and renewable energy stuff. Like, yeah, it's been really amazing. So that's the other thing is that I'd really recommend if you start a podcast and you sort of get different kinds of interest in it, say yes and see what happens.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't seem super related.
Yeah. When we first got that invite to attend like an energy conference, we were like, what? Do they even know what we do? This makes no sense. And then we got to like sit in a panel and like ask questions of actual scientists. which was just so cool. So yeah, like be willing to, say yes to things and also say no to things that like give you a bad vibe. But yeah, it's weird because podcasting can lead you into so many other things that you wouldn't think are related, but it's just sort of, it gets you on the radar, and if people are interested in the things that you are sharing and the thoughts that you have, like it can take you other places too. So
yeah. So, and we also recognize though that, this is our hobby. This is what we do for fun. It's an excuse to hang out, again, to laugh at our own jokes. We still do that. But you may or may not be doing a podcast because you want to turn it into a career. You want to get experience doing broadcasting or doing audio editing and production, or, whatever it is, right? So keep your eyes on the prize. If you are doing podcasting because you have a goal, whether it's a project for school or something that you want to turn into, a paid gig, or you're doing it to support somebody else's work or whatever it is, have that goal in mind, but, be prepared to be flexible around it. I would say, the fact that we have an audience doing an Indigenous feminist science fiction podcast, to me, really demonstrates that whatever it is that you're interested in, there are people out there that will listen to it, that also have that interest, that are going to be excited that you're doing what you're doing. So if you're really interested in, like, I don't know, 19th century locomotive engineering philosophy or something, like, do a podcast.
You will find a community.
Somebody will be super into that.
Yeah.
So I would just say, like, whatever it is that you're interested in, what's going to keep you going is your passion for it. Because when it comes down to it, like audio production, editing, posting online, that kind of thing, it's kind of a slog, especially when you're first starting. It is a lot of hours that you're putting into it. So make sure that your passion is what's driving you around this, because you may not get a huge audience, right? Like, you can't kind of presume that you're going to be able to bring in a lot of advertising revenue, or, get a lot of accolades or whatever it is. You might, like,
and it might be years later too. Yeah. Like you might have to be out there for a bit before people discover you and are like, oh my gosh, 19th century locomotives. Woo.
Yeah. Totally. So I would say, whatever it is that you're taking up, let it be your interest in it. Find what sort of lights your fire around it to sort of bring you in.
Like it may not always be this way, but for us, we really, when we're talking about, we're going to do it until it's not fun. It should also give back to you. Like, don't get me wrong. We deal with some pretty deep and traumatic issues in our podcast. Like, we're not talking about, bubblegum and fairies. We're talking about like colonialism. So we deal with some heavy topics, but we do it in a way that like is joyful and hopeful. That's a deliberate choice. So if you're wanting to deal with like deep issues in your community and things like that, you have to recognize that can be a place that sort of drains you. And so how can you make it something that is also that gives back to you, that sort of restores you, and not in that weird capitalist like self-care way, but rather just like, how is what you're doing generative for you? Is it giving you enough energy to keep going, or is it something that's just going to like suck the life out of you? Because I think it was like most podcasts peter out after 3 episodes.
Yeah,
it's really early on.
Yeah, if your podcast makes it to 10 episodes, apparently you're in the like very small minority.
Yeah.
So if you're looking, and I mean, there are limited run podcasts, right? Like there are limited run TV series or whatever it is. So if you want to do a limited run podcast, absolutely go for it. Like your podcast doesn't have to last forever, and probably it shouldn't, right? Like, these projects are organic and they have lifespans, and that's good and important. But if you do want to do something sort of ongoing and you're really interested, like, make sure that, it's sort of one of those perpetual motion machines, right? Like, you're giving yourself energy as you're putting energy into it.
All right. Do we want to go into this checklist?
Yeah. So maybe before we dive into like the physical checklist, we can sort of go through some of the basic stuff.
Yeah. Sounds good.
So podcasting, you can do a lot more with it than you might think, sort of diving in. Like, anything that you can do on the radio, basically you can do on podcasting. A lot of radio shows these days have podcasts, or they'll upload their show as a podcast onto the internet or whatever. So you can do anything from radio play style stuff to investigative journalism to, media commentary, to interviews, to reviews, to, academic stuff, to, I think they have like tabletop role play game podcasts, like anything that you're interested in. One of I think the most well-known podcasts coming out of Canada is like a Harry Potter sort of like,
really?
It's a Harry Potter like academic fan podcast.
Oh my God. So I really don't listen to that many podcasts. So it's funny because I still, have no idea what's out there.
So, I mean, this is one thing, we didn't do a lot of research, but we encourage you to do some research. If you have podcasts that you enjoy listening to, listen to them. What do you like about them? What it brings you back for more? What do you find interesting? What about the genre of these podcasts do you find interesting? Is it something like, how does it work? Or I can't remember those ones.
Cool,
but something that sort of dives into the history and the function of things. Do you like podcasts where people are interviewed? Do you like podcasts where people are just chatting? Do you like podcasts that, take deep dives, or do you like podcasts that are a little, more chill and you just listen for fun? And what do you like about those podcasts? Think like when you're listening to them, think about how they're using audio, how they're using music, what kinds of sections they have in them. Do they bring in different formats? Like for our podcast, we do media criticism, but we also do sci-fi world building. Like we have our own sci-fi world that we do stuff in, and we build narratives around it. And it's super fun for us.
Yeah.
So don't feel like you have to stick with one thing, and don't feel like you have to just use one podcast as your inspiration. If you have a bunch, figure out what about them sort of overall is bringing you back,
or what you don't like, because a lot of the podcasts out there, like I say, I don't listen to them. And the reason I don't listen to a lot of podcasts is because it is dominated by white men. And do I really need to hear more white men opinions about things? Like, honestly, no, I really don't.
I had to stop listening to a podcast that I was really excited about because it had, like, I'm not even kidding, 3 ads in the first 10 minutes.
Oh yeah, the ad thing. I can't.
What a turn off.
We're sort of like in this era now where we're luckily not having to sit through ads all the time. And for podcasts to be doing that, like, obviously they're doing it because it brings in money, but man, I just can't.
Yeah. So figure out, from a genre perspective, from a structural perspective, how do you want your podcast to look? And actually take some time to really sit down and figure that out, write it down, write out a plan for yourself. And then what genre as well do you want? Interview, journalism, critique, all of a world building,
of the above, like, I don't,
a fiction serial that you're writing that you want to, do an audiobook for, whatever.
Just like ASMR, you're just sitting there eating your supper, like over the microphone. Definitely people will be listening to that, right?
Yeah.
It could be anything. I've heard of people doing like more of this is like video, but you could do this podcasting too, where they're literally just like reading stories out. They're like, oh, this is your bedtime story time.
Yeah, LeVar Burton has one. It's Geordie LaForge in Star Trek: The Next Generation.
That is just doing like wonderful work. I love that.
Yeah, it's all like, and there's so many out there too. So if you don't listen to podcasts currently, find out what's popular right now, and then also take a deep dive into those weird little ones too. Because they're doing, like, that's where the real innovation is going to be happening.
And you might just like be, maybe you're not familiar with podcasts and you're like, oh, maybe I could do this thing. Don't let the lack of other podcasts doing that thing stop you.
Yes,
you can do the thing, So it's exciting. And so when we started, we were like, nobody's gonna listen because we're like, I don't know, are there other Indigenous out there? And our moms will listen. Our moms never listen.
No, our moms don't like it.
Yeah, they don't like it. They don't like all the swearing.
No.
But then we did find that there are a lot of people out there who have also been thinking the things that we were thinking, and we didn't know. So we didn't have them as an audience in mind when we started. We didn't really have an audience in mind, and it worked out. But it's well worth your time to think about, like, who are you speaking to? Because this is a thing too. You might think, well, I want this to be super, super popular. And then you realize in order to be super, super popular, you have to appeal to a certain type of audience, a very white audience, probably middle class, upper middle class. And then do you really want to talk to them? Maybe. But the way that you're going to present yourself is going to be different depending on who you're speaking to. Right. And then it's up to other people who are not maybe your main audience to decide to come in and access what you're saying. So like in all things, are you going to alter your voice? Are you going to be very authentic to your voice? That's a strategic choice on your part, and it is completely within your control. So don't let somebody come in and be like, well, if you just spoke a bit more like this, I'd listen to you. Just be like, yeah, sorry, that's not me.
Yeah. And the other thing to think about too, and this is something that I don't think we could have ever predicted this, but we have some fans who we have met who are children. Quite young, and we swear a lot. We talk a lot about sort of adult themed stuff because we, like, Indigenous podcasting, when we started, was really, really new. I think we were one of the first Indigenous women hosted podcasts. And so it brought in a lot of people that we could have never expected to listen. Yeah. And I definitely was feeling pretty sheepish when that little kid rocked up.
with the Métis and space shirt. And we're like, I'm so sorry for being not a good role model.
Yeah. So think too, like, think about, your family's going to hear this probably, some kids could hear it, your elders could hear it. And I'm not saying, don't censor yourself around that, but just be prepared that, if your grandma listens to it and you're talking about certain things, your grandma might not be super happy that that's getting out there.
Yeah.
So
we do a fair amount of apologies, actually. We're like, don't listen to this, Mom.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
But just like my fingers crossed, like, please don't listen.
Not this episode. Yeah.
So it's just something to think about. And again, like, don't let other people's opinions censor what your message is, what it is that you want to say. Just be aware that you don't have control over who's going to listen to it. And so just make sure that whatever you're putting out there, whatever you're saying, you're okay with it being out there. You're okay with how it's, going to be, how it may or may not be taken.
Yeah. And that's like, it's kind of it's a form of social media, really. But so, it's entirely possible that people will find it and they'll decide something is problematic in what you're doing and come at you. But we've actually found so I've been very heavily online for many, many years. And so I get a lot of stuff coming at me from there, but we have found with our podcast, people sort of self-select out. We haven't gotten much hate mail, and given how much we come after white supremacy, we expected a lot more. But I think with podcasting, our podcasts tend to run around an hour. Yours definitely doesn't have to be that length, or it can be longer, up to you. But we find that the kind of people who would hate our stuff are not taking an hour to sit there and listen and come up with fuel to burn us down with. So I can't say that that's going to be true for everybody, but I think that is probably a bonus to the format. Is it requires a bit of work, and people who don't like you are not going to put that work in for the most part.
Yeah, I think the closest thing that we've ever gotten to hate mail was somebody, I think, tweeted at us or something and said, "At least one of you is funny."
Which is also hilarious because we get a lot of comments saying that people can't tell us apart. So
yeah.
Oh,
and that reminds me. So the other thing that you're going to run into, and this is something that, again, could not have predicted, is that audio media and your voice, when people listen to your voice, it creates a sense of intimacy for the listener that is, ultimately not a real sense of intimacy. So when you're doing a podcast and people are listening to it, they really start to feel like they know you, even if you're not talking about yourself or anything about your life or, whatever the subject is. People just will feel very familiar with you, and that will translate into in-person interactions, which can be
a little awkward sometimes.
Kind of awkward. Yeah. And it's nobody's fault.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's not bad necessarily. It's just it's good to be aware of that, that you're going to come across that sometimes, and to not just be like, whoa, wait, what?
Who are you? Stop talking to me like this.
Yeah.
And it'll happen to you too.
Yeah.
When I first talked to Ryan McMahon in person, I'd been listening to his podcast for years, and I had to physically restrain myself basically from being like, "Ryan, how are the kids? How's the house in Winnipeg?" Oh, we've known each other for years. We did not know each other for years. So just true, just be aware that is a dynamic that you will encounter, because it can be a little strange and off-putting when it first happens.
So you think about, what your passion is, what your interest, what sort of niche genre you're getting into. You think about who might be listening to this, with a mind to who could be listening that you never anticipated. And then, then you want to come up with a title for your podcast, right? And the title, again, we didn't really think about it that much, but our title does really sort of explain what we do. It's weird, right? We're Métis in space. We're going to talk about space stuff, and we're Métis, right? So your podcast is going to be the first entry of people into, this world you're creating, right? Mm-hmm. So, what are you going to call it?
Yeah.
And bounce it off of a few people, be like, oh, we're going to call ourselves this, or I'm going to call myself this, what do you think I'm going to talk about? Right. And maybe you want to be weird with it. Maybe you want it to sound like one thing and then have it be another thing. That's fine too. But just be aware that people are going to see that title and be like, this is probably this.
Yeah.
Right?
And you want it to be relatively short.
Yeah.
And that's because like when you think about the platforms that you get your podcasts off of, so like iTunes or Spotify or whatever it is, you don't have a lot of space. You basically, when people go onto those platforms to check out a podcast, you get like a small square with your logo, and then you get a few, like very few characters really. So if you're going to have, like, if you want to have a podcast called I really love 19th century locomotive engineering, it's going to be like, I love ... right? So just, you're going to want something a little snappy. So just, remember that you can have your episode titles and stuff like that can be a little bit longer because, once people have sort of clicked on it, it's because they're investing in it, right? Like they're going to check it out. But for your title in particular, just keep it short, keep it snappy. And think about, what it is that people are going to see when they enter those platforms that you're going to be posting to.
I always have trouble coming up with snappy names. So I always go to Molly because Molly is Molly is the name wizard. So I'm just like, I can't think of this thing. And Molly's like, boo, 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 there, done. So if you have somebody like that in your life, definitely just, if you're struggling with the name, just be like, please help me out here. That's fine.
Yeah, ask around.
Outsource that.
So the other thing to think of too, and this is not something that you have to do first thing, but it's good to keep in mind, is what is your logo going to be? If you go on to like iTunes is great for this because it just like brings up everything in these like long, lines and grids. If you look at how a lot of podcasts visually are representing themselves these days, they're very similar. A lot of the time it'll be like somebody's face or, whatever. And the text is really, really big on it. And obviously that's for recognition or whatever, but don't be afraid to like play around with that a little bit. Like our logo, we didn't know anything about podcast logos when we commissioned it. So it just looks how it looks. But it is quite different from sort of how things have sort of settled in to, I guess, like being kind of more normative around visual representation. So don't be afraid. Like if you just have an image that you love, or if you're an artist and you just, you're like, this is it. This screams my podcast.
Yeah.
Do it, even if it doesn't look like what else is up there.
Yeah. You're going to have to do a little bit of research into exactly the dimensions that you're going to need for that because iTunes will only accept like a specific dimension for the podcast cover. But you can get, if you have the skills, great. Otherwise, there's things you can do online. You can find to resize it to that those dimensions. And then once you have that, it's pretty easy. So it doesn't have to be that fancy. It just has to sort of, be something that you like, that you're like, yes, this embodies what I'm doing.
Yeah. So you've sort of done some of that front end imagining, right? So you've got your sort of the podcast focus, the topic, you've got the format or the genre that you're using, you're thinking about your audience, you're thinking about your title, you're thinking about what your podcast logo is going to look like. And so now you're getting ready to sort of sit down and plan out what your episodes are going to be. Now, planning can be anything from really in-depth, like we know the big podcasts have whole teams doing research and script writing and all of that. So you can go really in-depth into how you're planning out your podcast, or you can do it the way we do it, which is
wing it. Yeah. Like we have a set, we did sit down and we were like, okay, here are some things that we're going to do in our episode. And we've pretty much followed that format ever since. So that was, again, going in without having heard a lot of podcasts, without any podcasting experience. We were like, okay, what do we want to talk about in this, like maybe 45 minutes to an hour period of time? And yeah, it doesn't have to be like super overstructured. I think that's part of what could stop you is if you start being like, oh gosh, I need this to be perfect and everything. Like it doesn't have to be perfect. Also, you don't have to worry so much about how it sounds necessarily, because okay, one of the things that we did encounter and got over pretty easy at the beginning was like your voice sounds different. Like if you've ever recorded yourself, this, and maybe you're already over it, but like, I'm hearing my voice right now. And then when I hear it on the recording, I just want to die.
Yeah.
I'm just like
very cringy. Yeah. You sound so tinny outside of your own head. That's the case for everybody.
Yeah.
Absolutely everybody. You do not sound like that to other people. And it might take a little while to get used to, but it's worth pushing through that discomfort because you've got amazing things to say.
Exactly.
All right. So again, so now you're sitting down and you're thinking about your first episode, or you're thinking about your run of episodes, right? Depending on what it is that you want to do. If you're going to do like a fiction serial podcast, for example, so you're going to, say you're writing a story, you want to read a chapter of the story over, a period of 10 episodes, and that's going to be your whole story. So you're going to want to really plan out, in that case, you're going to want to plan out exactly what you're reading, what the sort of story arc is going to be, where the climax is going to hit, all of these different things. If you're doing a podcast like Chelsea and I, you're going to decide what episode of a TV show you want to watch, what kind of wine you want to drink during it. And, if you want to have any silly little bits or shticks or something that you want to bring in.
Yeah. And you need to introduce, like, you want to grab people, right? Like, imagine somebody's flipping through on Spotify and they, they're just looking through podcasts to listen to, like all of us, they're probably just going to hit play and listen to the first few seconds. And if in the first few seconds, they can't figure out what the heck this podcast is about, they might flip away. Right. So especially at the beginning, when you're just starting, because we don't do this all the time now. When we started, we were like, hi, here we are. This is our show, and this is what we're doing. And then we got into it, and we kind of stopped explaining this is what we're doing every time after we'd been doing it for a bit. We just figured people will probably know by then.
Yeah. So yeah, because the other thing that you'll find too is, we've been doing this for a number of years now, and we still find that by a long shot, our most listened to episode is episode 1.
Yeah.
Occasionally people will jump in if they see, for example, like, the movie Avatar, right? With
people
the blue
love
aliens.
that.
Yeah. If they're like, oh, Avatar, I remember that. That was like weird and kind of racist. I'm going to click that one, right? So you will have sort of certain ones that people will jump in because they have a very specific interest in that particular thing that you may be talking about. But for the most part, you want to do that upfront front-loading work in episode 1.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that we're seeing more and more of in podcasting is that podcasts will release trailers before they release the first episode. So that's like a 1 to 2 minute sort of breakdown or teaser of what the episode is, or what the podcast is about. So my brother, for example, has a podcast. It's called Serving Sonic, and it's a sort of Canadian contemporary music podcast. They released a cute little trailer at the beginning where it was the 3 hosts basically just chatting about what it is that they're doing. And just introducing it, some fun music in the background, sort of showing off some of their audio aesthetic, which it ends up being quite important.
Mm-hmm.
And then it can generate some interest, or you release the teaser and then the first episode at the same time. And it just gives people, a chance to get excited about it, to figure out if, it's the podcast for them, or, what have you. So that's another option, but that's something that's like kind of relatively recent, I think.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really good idea. Yeah. Okay. So you've planned it out a little bit, you know what you're going to do. Now is the time to do it. And so you sit down and, you got to budget some time. Then you're looking at, what am I going to use for equipment? Right. So let's talk a little bit about that. Is the equipment, you might be tempted, and especially if you're one of those people that picks up special interests a lot, you're going to be like, oh, I'm going to buy the most amazing microphone. I'm going to buy all this, all this equipment and stuff. And $1,000 later that you don't actually have, you're sitting there going, wait, what if I only do this for 2 episodes? Yeah. So don't do that. You don't need to go and buy a ton of stuff. Honestly, technology just improves so much and so quickly that the microphone on your phone is better than some of the microphones that we had earlier. We spent some money buying these, microphones that you could plug into your phone to go around, do interviews. And those microphones suck now. The quality can't even match what is just on a regular phone.
Yeah.
So don't think that you need a lot of tech for this.
Yeah, you absolutely don't, especially if it's sort of a podcast that you're doing and you're not going to be speaking with somebody else. Mm-hmm. You do not, you can spend $0. The other place that you can look, or other places that you can check out, include libraries. Yep. Public libraries will often have podcasting equipment available for, checkout, or, sometimes libraries, and this includes university spaces as well, because universities are technically public institutions. You can often book space in recording rooms for free or quite cheap. And a recording room, a sound room is wonderful. I don't know if you can hear sort of, Chelsea's family sort of walking around upstairs.
We've never recorded in a sound booth. We always record in our home. So there's always, and that's sort of like a stylistic choice. mostly based on laziness, but I like it. I like it because it brings, we talk a lot about family and the importance of including, so it works.
Yeah.
But you might get distracted. You might want that really nice, crisp sound. And those facilities are amazing. And yeah, you can quite often get into them for free. So why not? Right.
Yeah.
And we bought, I'm just going to hold this up. So this is our Blue Yeti microphone. And so that was sort of like our big purchase. Did we do our first episode on it, or I don't, because we did our first episode in like three days
after we decided to do it.
Yeah. I don't even remember how we recorded it. So I think we got this a bit later, but this can run you anywhere from like, you can get it sometimes used, but like anywhere from $100 to $200, which is a chunk of change, but it's perfect for us. Like I don't need anything fancier than that.
Yeah. I do know the Blue Yeti is like fairly standard among podcasters, including professional level podcasters. So again, like you don't have to spend thousands of dollars. You don't even have to spend $1. Like let's be totally clear. Like the technology on your phone, the technology, like the software that you can download for editing and audio production and whatnot on your computer, you can get all of that for free and produce a professional sound quality level podcast.
Yep.
It's totally up to you. If one of the things that you're doing this podcast for example, is to learn the ins and outs of audio production, you really want to do a deep dive into that, then absolutely, do a ton of research, shell out some money, figure out, what audio platforms you like best. But if you're just doing this because you have something that you want to say, you could leave this workshop, and we're not even gonna, we have another half that we're gonna do next week, but you could leave this workshop and produce something and have it ready for next week. Easy.
Yeah.
With absolutely, no money sunk into it at all. So please, like one of the great things that we love about podcasting is how accessible it remains in spite of the fact that you have all of these very huge budget, very professionalized, whatever. It's still a medium that anybody can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you've got your mic. You're going to want to obviously have something that you're recording onto. Your phone obviously has, sound recording, and it will save it onto the cloud or onto your phone or whatever it is. Another great app is
SoundCloud.
SoundCloud, but on your phone, sorry, let me just pull it out. Quick Voice Pro, that's what it's called.
Oh, okay.
That's another great app that we've used for different projects. And that one, there's a free version of it. That's amazing. You can pay, I think it's like $3 for the pro version of Quick Voice Pro. And it just gives you a few extra features, but it's not great for editing. That's in general what we found is that your phone is amazing for recording. It's not awesome for editing. So you're going to want to do, again, a little bit of research into different audio editing platforms.
Yeah. Like Audacity is free. And is a pretty good one. And there's so many tutorials out there too. If you're a bit intimidated and you've never used it before, like me, there are all sorts of like videos or tutorials that will guide you through the basic process. Yeah, you don't have to get a degree in audio engineering for this stuff. We have definitely, like our sound hasn't really improved. In fact, as our computers die, some of our episodes sound really terrible, but whatever.
Yeah, it happens. But again, right, like for us in particular, we are not wedded to we basically like we don't answer to anybody but ourselves.
Exactly.
So we aren't all that worried about our audience. Like, we apologize if an episode sounds particularly bad, but we don't have to prove anything to advertisers. We don't have to put out a certain quality of whatever to have people, put money into us or whatever, because we don't make any money off this. We don't put any money into it.
It's no strings attached, but strings can become attached once you start to monetize it. So be aware of that. Is like, if you decide to, and a lot of people do for all sorts of great reasons, monetize their podcasts with advertising and things like that, then people can start making claims on how you do your work, which you really need to evaluate to what extent you're okay with that and what you're not okay with.
Yeah.
So we have about 5 minutes left.
Yeah. So I think maybe to end, because next week we're going to go sort of more deeply into sort of the technical side of things. Once you've recorded, how do you get it out onto the internet? Some of the things that you want to think about, kind of around your publishing of the podcast, and then, how to, if you want to promote it, if you want to do other things with it. But I do want to say, sort of to end, sort of along the theme of, having to, I guess, meet people's expectations. The other thing to remember is that for BIPOC in particular, you do need to be aware, depending on what it is that you're saying, a lot of what you're doing is going to be seen as political, even if you don't necessarily see it that way.
You'd be talking about like kitchen curtains from different eras, and people are going to be like, if it's BIPOC produced, they're going to be like, oh.
Yeah. And sometimes that is like a gasp of like, wow, this is amazing, like incredible marginalized voices talking about kitchen curtains. And sometimes it's going to be gasps of horror, like, oh my God, I can't believe they're talking about kitchen curtains now. Like
everything's next. They're going to be canceling kitchen curtains. Like, yeah, whatever.
So, be aware that that is something that can happen. And also be aware, like as Indigenous podcasters, and particularly as Indigenous podcasters who, as Chelsea mentioned, we talk a lot about white supremacy, we talk a lot about capitalism, we talk a lot about the Canadian state. We are very aware that we are almost certainly being surveilled by Canada. That's just a reality for us.
Which is hilarious. Somebody is getting paid to sit there and listen to our like
terrible jokes. Yeah. So, be aware that that is something that is just a fact of life these days, unfortunately. And so again, you do want to be, I don't want to say careful, because again, like you don't want to necessarily censor yourself.
It's just about being aware of it. Yeah. As you have to be aware about it, in your general life, this is still part of life.
Yeah.
The one thing I would say too, like totally kind of different things. So we sort of this bit that we're doing today is very much about like the conceptualization of your podcast. So the other thing I want you to get thinking about is the sort of the soundscape that you want to create for this. So we explained that for our podcast, because it's cheesy sci-fi, we went back to that beep boop sound, like very deliberately. So think a little bit about that, because also the sounds that you bring in also will draw people in, right? So what do you want to, what would your theme sound be like? And you can't necessarily use commercial music, obviously, for copyright reasons. So you might have to create something or have a friend create something for you. But what is that going to sound like? Is it going to be like, classical music? Is it going to be like some heavy metal sounds? Is it going to be like I don't know, just like whatever, the sounds of nature, right? Like think about what fits your topic and what makes sense for your show as well. So all of those things should be sort of like percolating, right? And then once you have a moment to sort of plan some of it out, then we can get into the technical aspects of it.
And again, there are all sorts of apps and websites and stuff where you can
make your own music
for free. Chelsea put together all of our beep boops, our intros and outros for free on an app. One of her daughters has done some music for us as well, which is amazing. So again, like, it's as much investment as you want to sink into it. Your biggest investment is going to be time. So maybe with that,
that's a great time to stop and ask and see if there's any questions.
Yeah.
So can an ask a myth in a while, Mr. Hey, thanks for listening to us. Babylon.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording now.